advice that I've heard people give is always take a late apex. And it sounds really good in theory, but the problem is that means that you have to know where the apex is. And when I'm looking at this corner here behind me, when I walk through this, I have no idea where that apex actually is. When we look at a corner, we generally think of a corner as having three different points. We think of a line, our path to travel through a curve, and we think of our exit. This is when the bike comes back to vertical. We think of the apex, which is the closest point that we come to the inside of the curve, and we think of a turn point. This is when we commit to the turn and to the apex, or the apex and the exit. During the Learn to Ride and during the Street Skills and during the Returning Rider, we do not teach apex. And the reason that we don't teach apex is that it has a very major flaw. The concept of riding a specific apex comes from a competitive environment, racetracks, where you have a consistent curve, where you have controls, where people are waving flags to tell you that there's a problem up ahead. On the street, we don't have that. And when you're talking about a new rider, if I'm looking at a curve and I say, here, I want you to take a late apex. That's a beautiful line. I come up and there I go. How do they know where the late apex is? One, you're now asking them to look down into the curve, not at the exit. And if you don't have an exit, if you don't know where the road's going, you can't pick the apex. This is not the goal. This is the byproduct. Number one, you have to have an exit. You can't let off the brakes. You can't add throttle. You can't commit to the curve until you know where you're going. Number two, I need a turn point. How quickly will I turn in? If I'm a new rider and I'm very slow on my tip in, if this is my turn point and I start to turn and I turn slow, I might be all the way to the outside. Doesn't mean I won't make it, but it does mean that there's definitely a chance that I'm going to have an issue here. If I turn in very quickly, I might end up really tight. That turn point is relative to the rider. This is the fixed point. Every rider is going to respond to the same. We know where we're going. That's what we do. That apex may change depending how I ride in. I can take a center apex. If I turn in quickly, I might take a late apex. If I turn in early, I've probably misread the corner. This apex is also tied to the concept of trail braking. Trail braking for the street is not about going faster, it's not about high performance, it's not about high speed entries. Trail braking is when you finish your commitment to braking and when you commit to the exit. If I'm looking at a curve, and there's my curve, and I'm going, that's about the late apex, and I come all the way in, and for most of us, we finish the braking early, we tip into the late apex, I'm on the throttle before I get to the apex. That allows me to drive out of the corner. The problem is, if that corner continues around, and I can't tell, because it's full of trees, all of a sudden, I've got a problem. What the trail braking does is allow us to continue to carry my brakes, and as I notice that it curves, I continue to slow, 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 and then drive at the following exit. That's one way to get through that corner. We do not teach trail braking during the Learn to Ride. We don't even teach it in the Returning Rider, although it is the primary focus of the street skills, along with braking. But what we have to do is make sure that our vision is tied to that braking. If I come into here and I see that that's a problem, I can always release the brakes and allow myself to come out a little farther and hook in on the back side. I'm going to carry the brakes in. That's the point. As I'm not going to release my brakes back here, I'm just going to carry a little bit of brake pressure, so if needed, I can hold the inside of the curve. You don't commit all the way to the exit. You'll notice none of this is relative to an apex, because the apex really doesn't matter. As long as we're staying between the lines, we have control, we're not over speed, then we're okay. And that's what we want to be teaching is vision. When we tell riders about a curve, what we want to say is find your exit. Once you find your exit, then you can run a straight line, the straightest line you can to that exit. Because it does exist in books, because it does exist on certain licensing tests, it's perfectly acceptable to mention that if you choose this and find that exit and you turn in to make the straightest line, you will often be a late apex. And this is why we don't teach apexing, we teach the exit, we teach vision. You only ride based on what you can see. And you brake until you can commit to the next phase of the corner. So don't finish your braking all the way back here if you don't know what's going on and then jump onto the throttle. Finish the primary braking, leave your finger on the lever, leave the brake light intact until you get the exit, then drive out. Whatever happens in the middle is a byproduct. That's why we don't teach apex, and that's why trail braking is introduced in concept and flow during the end of the LTR. We don't teach it, but if you watch the activities, you'll see that there are multiple activities within the LTR that allow riders to naturally develop the concept of trail braking, the returning rider as well, and then once we get into the street skills, we teach it in full form so people know how to do it effectively and properly.